Hey folks, hope you all are doing well. I'm Karan Bandal from Econosite, your weekly economic wrap from India and around the world. So let's get started with some geopolitics. Russia, the US, India, and the price cap on oil. Is India helping the global oil prices from spiking and thus helping you and me at the petrol pump or the gas station? The answer is yes. Here is why. After the Russia Ukraine war began in late Feb 2022, Western countries needed to come up with a policy that would curtail or eliminate Russia's revenue from oil, in turn weaken Russia, which ultimately, in more of an optimistic scenario, puts an end to the war. And they could have done that through a sharp cut in Russian oil exports, but they did not. See, the global oil demand is roughly 102 million barrels per day. Russia produces about 10.5 million barrels per day of oil. If you try to take this Russian oil, or about 10% of the total available production offline, while demand stays the same, oil prices would go through the roof. What the G7 group of big economies did instead is that they came up with a price cap mechanism. The price cap of $60 a barrel, that is 30% below the market price, took effect in December 2022 for the Russian crude. It worked because countries like India are acting as a bridge between Russian crude oil that the West has shunned and refined petrochemical products still flowing to the US, the EU, Britain, Japan, and Australia. What do I mean by that? You can see import of the Russian crude by Britain, Canada, Japan, the US, and the EU is approaching zero, while the import of the same by India, China, and others is widening. Now see what India has done with this excess crude oil. India has used roughly 80% of the imported oil for domestic needs, and the rest, India refined it and sold at a profit to the EU, the US, Britain, Japan, and Australia. So the Western countries still maintained access to the oil they needed to keep their economies going, while India added to her quantum of exports. On the Russian side, the price cap imposed costs on Russia. Russia's oil production is 8% below pre-war forecasts, and revenues in the first quarter of 2023 are down 40% year on year. You can't really bypass the price cap mechanism. Dodging the price cap requires new, possibly unfavorable deals with non-Western tankers and insurers. This almost guarantees Russia gets a subpar price for its oil by quite a margin, and it shows in their revenue slump. So, this price cap mechanism achieves both the global oil price stability and the reduction in Russia's oil revenue, with the help from countries like India. On to the world's largest economy, the United States' upcoming manufacturing boom. Last year, production at American factories increased, and so did the production of factories themselves. The graph shows how much the country spends on building factories each year. You can see a sharp spike starting roughly around late 2021, and for every month since then it just kept going up. Construction spending by US manufacturers more than doubled over the past year. For April 2023, the annual rate reached nearly $190 billion, compared with $90 billion in June 2022. As a result, manufacturing now accounts for around 13% of non-government construction. Factories are being constructed everywhere from desert to resort towns, battery and electric vehicle factories in the Rust Belt, while solar panel and renewable energy factories in much of the south and southeast. Impressive, isn't it? Especially because all this is happening while construction spending in most other areas of the US economy has fallen, including office, healthcare, residential, and educational construction. This manufacturing construction boom is likely to continue since, according to Kearney's 2022 Reshoring Index, a whopping 96% of American companies have shifted production to the US or are evaluating reshoring operations, a spike from 78% in the 2021 index. The sudden rise in factory construction corresponds with passage of two acts: CHIPS and Science Act in July 2022, which provided $280 billion in funding to boost manufacturing of semiconductors, and Inflation Reduction Act in August 2022, which included $369 billion in clean energy and climate investments. There is good news on the jobs front also. The US has added around 800,000 jobs in manufacturing employment over the last 2 years. Now, employing around 13 million workers. It is estimated that the Inflation Reduction Act itself will create up to 1.5 million jobs by 2030 in manufacturing, construction, and renewable energy. The challenge, according to National Association of Manufacturers, is that the manufacturing skills gap caused by the labor market struggle to find workers with highly technical and manual expertise could lead to 2.1 million unfilled jobs by 2030. But overall, there are good days ahead for American manufacturing. Let's end on India and its electronics manufacturing. The Indian government has set a steep target for India's electronics manufacturing sector. In 2014, electronics manufacturing in India was worth only about $12 billion. Now, when we say electronics manufacturing sector, we talk about two parts: electronic goods manufactured in India that are used domestically in India, and electronic goods manufactured in India that are exported to other countries. The combined value of these two parts, when quantified, reveals the size of India's electronics manufacturing sector. By financial year 2026, India seeks to increase the size of this sector to $300 billion, a massive 20 to 25 times growth in about a decade. There is good progress being made in this direction. Led by locally manufactured mobile phones, India's electronics industry saw a record export of electronic goods at an estimated $22.5 billion in financial year 2023. India's domestic electronics market has gotten bigger as well in the last 9 years, currently valued at $65 billion. Continuing on the path of import substitution, the domestic market is estimated to reach at best $150 to $180 billion mark over the next 4 to 5 years. So to achieve $300 billion target, India needs to focus on increasing electronics exports to a range of $120 to $140 billion in the next 4 to 5 years. And if India can achieve this feat, it will go a long way in addressing India's jobless growth challenge. In summary, as companies diversify their supply chains by pulling some manufacturing out of China, coupled with the US government's support for the domestic manufacturing, US manufacturing seems to be a big winner. India is making the right moves to attract some of this manufacturing to the country, and it shows in India's rising goods exports. Finally, many market dislocations have taken place due to the Russia-Ukraine war, but India, along with some other key players, appears to be playing a pivotal role in maintaining at least the global oil price stability. I hope you found this week's wrap interesting. I'll speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.